It's now been 2 years and 3 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, thinking it would take them just a week or so, not much more, to knock it over. Instead, Ukrainians fought like lions. They beat the Russians back. But now, it's ugly. Ukraine is running out of men. They've had so many losses. So it's lowered the recruitment age from 27 to 25. It's also run short of ammunition, thanks in large part to right-wing Republican politicians in the US blocking fresh supplies for half a year until last month. And now Russia is boasting it's got new recruits, has more than 500,000 soldiers in Ukraine, and has launched fresh attacks towards Kharkiv in Ukraine's west. Well, joining me to discuss what's happening in Ukraine, its chances, plus Israel's advance now on Rafah in the Gaza Strip, is General Jack Keane. He's a retired four-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army, and now Chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Jack Keane, great to see you again. Russia has increased its attacks in Ukraine over the past couple of weeks. It's blown up a lot of the country's electricity supply. There's blackouts there. In a lot of the cities. It's supposedly thrown in more troops as well. It now says it's got more than 500,000 soldiers in Ukraine. Ukraine, on the other hand, is running out of soldiers and ammunition. How much danger is Ukraine now in? Because this sounds quite serious.
Well, first of all, certainly what has happened, the facts on the ground are what they are. In terms of the air campaign that Russia is running, a few months ago, the Ukrainians were knocking out the majority of the drones and the missiles that were being fired at their major cities, infrastructure, and the energy portion of it. Now the majority of those drones and missiles get through. And that's the harsh reality of the shortage of the missiles and interceptors that the Ukrainians need. They are on the way. Some of them are already there. And we're attempting to rush this as quickly as possible. And eventually, hopefully, Ukraine will return to a more stable situation when they get all of those interceptors. On the ground, the Russians, as you noted, have made some significant tactical gains, not only in the southeast and the Donbass region, but most recently and somewhat alarmingly in the vicinity of Kharkiv, a city that Russia had captured and Ukraine's took it back in 22, quite remarkably, and took a lot of land. What the Russians are doing, Andrew, is establishing a buffer zone right there on the border with Ukraine, because what the Ukrainians have been doing is going right up to the Russian border, at least within a couple of miles of it, and firing into Russia, particularly with their drones. And they're not able to fire any of the U.S. long-range systems, which is absolutely outrageous. But nonetheless, the Russians are tired of that and establishing this buffer zone. We don't think at the Institute for the Study of War that Russia has the capacity, at least right now, to seize Kharkiv and collapse the Ukrainian defenses in that area. So what we're hoping for, certainly, is that the munitions for to help Ukraine defend on the ground as well as in the air will get there soonest. You mentioned Russian people on the ground there. The 500,000 may be a bit of Russian exaggeration, but nonetheless, they have increased their numbers and they've replenished them with a lot of new troops. Ukraine just changed their draft law, moving from 27 to 25 to begin conscription. That'll get them about 70,000 more. They have to be trained, and they do have manpower shortages. All that said, we don't see Russia being able to take Ukraine, take their major cities in the near term. We believe the replenishment of the weapons and munitions will help Ukraine to defend itself. Long-range ATACMS, these are long-range missiles, 300 to 400 kilometers in length. They're in the Ukrainians' hands now, finally, after months of The Ukrainians asking for these weapons. They have the cruise missiles from the French and also from the Brits. F-16s are due to arrive in the summer and hopefully be flyable in the early fall for sure. So our best estimate here is Ukraine is going to be able to hold on to its territory that it has. How much territory it can take back remains to be seen, and that would likely largely be done in 25.
Yeah, it's a change from a year ago, of course, General, when we were all talking about, the spring-summer offensive that Ukraine would launch. That, of course, didn't get the advances Ukraine certainly had hoped. Now we're not talking about that. We're talking about Ukraine defence. So that's already a grim, let us hope. But how do you then see this ending when we're not even talking, as I say, about a Ukrainian counterattack to conquer more territory?
Well, I think what has happened is some positive things here. The grain shipments out of Ukraine are continuing because the Ukraine has driven back the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. They now have these long-range missile systems, and they fully intend to attack Russian bases in Crimea and reduce them. So the long-range deep attack, as we call it in the military, that Ukraine has capability to do, I think will be quite effective. How much they're going to be able to garner offensive operations, I do think limited offensive operations, particularly against Russia's offensive operations, when they culminate, and they're very vulnerable, and some of the operations they've just conducted in the southeastern part of the Donbass. If the Ukrainians had the capability, they could have counterattacked and took more territory as a result of it. They did not have that capability, or they knew the option was there for them. I believe they will have that come the summer and the fall, and we'll see if they can't make some limited progress. The idea of a major counteroffensive to take huge amount of territory, given the Russian defense in depth, that's pretty much off the table.
Yes, I think this war will last a long time yet, unfortunately, with so much more suffering. But the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, he's been in Ukraine this week, saying it's got American support, and also been playing guitar in a cafe in Kiev. Here he is. General King, what did you make of that? A touching show of solidarity, or perhaps a little bit too, I don't know, lacking in gravitas?
Well, first of all, it is quite remarkable. In Kyiv, for example, I've been there, and the restaurants and the cafes, and in this case, a club, are very active and quite thriving. Look, it's a lighter moment. I'm not making too much out of it. I think the secretary was likely invited to do this. I don't think he was forcing himself trying to find a nightclub where he could play some music. I think they invited him, and probably pretty tough to turn down an invitation by his host. So I didn't realize he can play a guitar. I wish he was a little bit more tough-minded in some of the other issues that the United States is facing.
Yes, that may well be. Well, in fact, on one of them, Israel has. There's just so much trouble around the world, General. I mean, unbelievable how the world has changed. Israel has stepped up its invasion of the last city in Gaza that it hasn't yet searched. That is Rafah, right on the south, on the Gaza's border with Egypt. How is that going?
Yeah, this is early stages. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans have moved out of the Rafah area at the request of the Israelis, somewhere around 500,000. Some people say it's as high as 800,000. We think that's a little high, but about 500,000 have moved. They haven't moved to an oasis or anything. They moved to another tent city where things, I'm sure, are pretty tough on them. But at least they're away from the fighting that's taking place in Rafah. This is early stages on the ground. The Israelis are being very careful because they know there's still people in Gaza. They blocked out the whole city in terms of districts, 270 districts, and they call ahead and tell them that they're coming into, say, District 27 to 48. Please get out of there. And so they're telling Hamas where they're going and pretty much when they're going as a major concession to help the civilians get out of there. Of course, Hamas doesn't really want the civilians to leave. I mean, it's so diabolical and sinister. They really want the martyrdom, as they refer to their word. They would welcome another 10 or 20,000 Gazans killed because it suits their purposes in terms of international condemnation of Israel and political isolation of it. Israel is determined to take down those 4 battalions that are there, to see if they can get their hands on the leaders of Hamas, which are in that area, and also, hopefully, this military pressure, what the IDF is thinking, would force Sinwar, the head of Hamas on the ground in Gaza, to come to the negotiating table and release hostages. That's one of the intents here, in addition to taking down the 4 or so battalions. But one of the things I want to point out to our audience here, the 300 or so kilometers of tunnels have really been a formidable challenge for the Israelis. Right now in northern Gaza, after northern Gaza was cleared, the Israelis are fighting again in there. And the reason is simply that the Israelis come in, clear an area, some of the fighters fight, some of them leave to come back another day when the Israelis are not there. And the tunnels afford them the protection and the concealment to do that, despite the number of tunnels they've attempted to destroy. I've never seen a complex situation like this in an urban setting where ground combat is being undertaken. It is quite a challenge, and the Israelis admit, Andrew, that the tunnel complexes are far more extensive than anything they had imagined.
Can you imagine all that aid money that's been diverted by Hamas into building the tunnels? And, you know, the efforts you describe of trying to protect civilian deaths, I've seen no modern army go that far as Israel has. And to see a Labor member of parliament, a Labor senator, say, oh, Israel's committing genocide, when you see, in contrast, what it is trying to achieve, it's just amazing to me that people can be so blind. General Jack King, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew. Thank you.